In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Nokia represented an image of institutional stability that few global technology companies could match. Headquartered in Espoo, Finland, the company had transformed itself from an industrial conglomerate into the world's leading mobile phone manufacturer. Its products were reliable, widely distributed, and profitable. Its internal processes were mature. Its governance structures were formal, layered, and predictable. By 2006, Nokia controlled more than a third of the global mobile handset market. In several regions, its market share exceeded 50%. The company's operating margins were strong, its balance sheet was healthy, and its brand was trusted by carriers, regulators, and consumers alike. Internally, this success reinforced a belief that Nokia's operating model, careful planning, consensus-driven decision-making, and incremental product evolution was not merely effective, but resilient. At the center of Nokia's leadership structure was a matrix organization designed to balance scale with local responsiveness. Product units, regional sales organizations, and platform teams shared authority. Major decisions required alignment across multiple executive committees. This structure had been intentionally built to avoid concentration of power and to reduce the risk of single-point failure. For much of Nokia's rise, it worked as intended. The mobile phone market at the time appeared stable. Devices were defined by hardware reliability, battery life, and incremental improvements in form factor. Software was present but secondary. Operating systems were largely invisible to consumers. Carriers controlled distribution and dictated many design constraints. Nokia's Symbian operating system, developed through a consortium model, fit this environment. It was modular, adaptable, and supported a wide range of devices across price tiers. Inside Nokia, Symbian was viewed less as a product and more as infrastructure. It was not designed to move quickly, but to scale safely. Changes required coordination among internal teams and external partners. This was considered a strength, not a limitation. Stability, compatibility, and predictability were prioritized over speed. By the mid-2000s, however, the external environment was beginning to shift. Advances in mobile processors, touchscreens, and wireless data were expanding what a handset could do. At the same time, consumer expectations were slowly changing. Devices were no longer seen only as communication tools, but as personal computing platforms. These signals were not ignored inside Nokia. Internal research groups explored touch interfaces, internet services, and application ecosystems. Prototypes existed. Some teams advocated for more aggressive software investment and tighter integration between hardware and software. However, these initiatives were filtered through existing governance mechanisms. Decisions about platform strategy required approval across multiple divisions, each with its own performance metrics and risk considerations. Hardware units focused on shipping volume and margin. Software teams focused on platform stability and compatibility. Regional sales organizations prioritized relationships with carriers. No single executive had unilateral authority to override these interests. As a result, strategic debates often resolved in favor of compromise. Rather than committing to a single, tightly integrated smartphone platform, Nokia continued to pursue a broad portfolio approach. Symbian would be extended. New variants would coexist. Experimental platforms would be incubated, but not prioritized. This approach aligned with Nokia's historical success. It reduced downside risk. It preserved optionality. It avoided alienating partners. From a governance perspective, it was defensible. In 2007, when Apple introduced the iPhone, the announcement was monitored closely but not treated as an immediate existential threat. Internally, the device was analyzed as a high-end product with limited carrier support and uncertain scalability. Its reliance on a touch-only interface raised concerns about battery life, reliability, and manufacturing yield. Its closed software model conflicted with prevailing industry assumptions. Nokia executives did not dismiss the iPhone outright, but they contextualized it within existing market frameworks. The belief persisted that Nokia's advantages, scale, distribution, supply chain efficiency, and brand trust would allow it to respond in due course. At the leadership level, this translated into a measured response rather than a structural shift. Symbian roadmaps were adjusted. Touch capabilities were added. Internet services were reorganized under new management. However, these changes were layered onto existing structures rather than replacing them. Internally, this created friction. Software engineers struggled with the increasing complexity of Symbian, which had been designed for keypad-based devices. Adding modern user interface paradigms required significant rework. Decision rights over the platform remained fragmented. No single team owned the end-to-end user experience. At the same time, Nokia's matrix structure made accountability diffuse. When products underperformed, responsibility was often shared across units. Feedback loops were slow. Escalation required navigating multiple committees. This reduced the organization's ability to make decisive course corrections. By 2008 and 2009, competitive pressure intensified. Apple's ecosystem approach demonstrated increasing momentum. Google's Android platform began gaining traction among other manufacturers. The industry's center of gravity shifted towards software ecosystems, developer communities, and user experience coherence. Within Nokia, these trends amplified existing debates. Some leaders argued for abandoning Symbian in favor of a modern, internally controlled platform. Others warned that such a move would disrupt existing products, alienate partners, and introduce execution risk. The company also invested in MeGo, a Linux-based platform developed in partnership with Intel, positioning it as a future high-end solution. However, MeGo existed alongside Symbian rather than replacing it. Resources were split, priorities were contested, product timelines slipped. Governance mechanisms, designed for incremental evolution, struggled to manage parallel platform bets. By 2010, Nokia's market share began to erode. While the company still shipped large volumes of devices, its influence over the industry's direction diminished. Margins tightened. The narrative shifted from leadership to defense. At this point, the board faced a governance inflection point. The existing leadership team had deep institutional knowledge, but was closely associated with past decisions. External perception increasingly framed Nokia as slow-moving and internally constrained. The board concluded that a leadership change was necessary to reset direction and signal urgency. In September 2010, Nokia appointed Stephen Elop as Chief Executive Officer. Elop came from Microsoft and was the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's history. The appointment itself reflected a departure from tradition. It introduced an external perspective and reduced reliance on internal consensus. Elop inherited an organization with strong assets but limited cohesion around a future platform strategy. Early internal assessments highlighted the difficulty of sustaining Symbian, the immaturity of MeGo, and the growing strength of Android and iOS. The window for gradual transition appeared to be closing. In February 2011, Nokia announced a strategic partnership with Microsoft, adopting Windows Phone as its primary smartphone platform. Symbian would be phased out. MeGo would be deprioritized. This decision represented a clear break from Nokia's prior multi-platform approach. From a governance standpoint, the shift concentrated decision-making authority. It simplified the platform portfolio. It aligned Nokia with a single external partner. It also introduced new dependencies and risks. Internally, the decision was disruptive. Teams working on Symbian and MeGo faced uncertainty. Organizational restructuring followed. Thousands of roles were eliminated or redefined. Institutional knowledge was lost. Morale was affected. Externally, the announcement was interpreted as an admission that Nokia could no longer compete independently at the platform level. Market reaction was mixed. Some analysts viewed the partnership as necessary. Others questioned its timing and execution risk. The transition proved difficult. Windows Phone devices struggled to gain market share. Ecosystem support lagged behind competitors. Nokia's hardware differentiation alone was insufficient to reverse momentum. Financial performance continued to deteriorate. In 2013, Nokia sold its handset business to Microsoft, effectively ending its role as a consumer mobile phone manufacturer. The company refocused on network infrastructure and technology licensing, areas where its institutional strengths remained relevant. In retrospect, Nokia's trajectory during the early smartphone era reflects the interaction between governance structures, leadership incentives, and environmental change. The company did not lack talent, technology, or awareness. What constrained its response was the accumulation of decisions made under conditions of past success. Consensus-based governance reduced risk, but also slowed adaptation. Distributed accountability preserved stability, but diluted urgency. Platform strategies designed for a previous era became liabilities when the basis of competition shifted. Nokia's leadership decisions were rational within the frameworks that existed at the time. They reflected incentives aligned with scale, predictability, and partner relationships. When those frameworks ceased to match market realities, the organization struggled to realign. The outcome was not the result of a single failure or misjudgment, but of structural inertia. Power moved through committees rather than individuals. Change required agreement rather than conviction. By the time decisive action was taken, the environment had already moved on. Nokia's story remains relevant because it illustrates how institutions built for one form of success can be constrained by that very success when conditions change. The mechanisms that create stability can also delay transformation. Governance, once an asset, can become a limiting factor. The company continues to exist today, operating in different segments and under different assumptions. Its earlier period in mobile phones stands as a case study in how power, decision-making, and structure shape corporate outcomes, not through dramatic collapse, but through gradual misalignment. The record shows no single moment of failure. Instead, it reveals a sequence of decisions, each defensible in isolation, that collectively narrowed the company's options. In that sense, Nokia's experience reflects a broader pattern observable across large organizations facing structural change. The lesson is not about technology, but about governance, how authority is distributed, how incentives are aligned, how quickly an institution can question the assumptions that once defined its success.